and Audacity in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co-host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about stress management and stress reduction.
Oh, yes, this is one of my favorite topics and most frustrating topics to talk about, because I feel like there's like so many good tidbits and things, and you can get such a deeper understanding of this topic. But at the same time, it's like figuring it out and applying it in your life can be really difficult because stress is everywhere. It's in every part of our life, and it's a big beast to tackle. But before we dive into that, wanted to dive into the giveaway and just reminding you guys of the giveaway that we're running for the month of December. So basically, if you submit a 5-star rating and review for the podcast on either Apple or Spotify reviews, then you're going to be entered into the giveaway that is going to be pretty epic. And we're going to be giving away hundreds of dollars worth of value to one or two winners, gift cards to, Lululemon, Target, Core Nutritionals, any other, fitness related brands. And we're also going to be finalizing and creating some Barbell Lifestyle Podcast apparel to send out to the winners as well. So make sure to enter that. Just screenshot your 5-star rating and review when you submit it and send it to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast page on Instagram, and you will be entered to win.
Yeah, I think we should definitely do 2 giveaway winners.
Yeah, I'm here for it.
Yeah. I love it. So we did do an episode, I think it was number 2, if I'm not mistaken. We did talk about burnout, and it was mostly in relations to fitness, like if you're burnt out in the gym. So I'm glad that this is kind of a bigger view of stress management as a whole. And of course, as it relates to fitness, but not specifically for that topic. So I'm really excited today to talk about it, because I think it's something super important. And again, while we are moving away from fitness, it does have a big parallel with your progress that you could be making in the gym.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In the gym, in your body composition. I mean, like, it's all going to really tie back down to, why aren't you seeing the results that you want to see? Well, maybe it's because you're not managing stress. And that's unfortunately what it comes down to for a lot of clients. Is they're like, well, I'm hitting my macros, or, eating the perfect diet. I'm training hard, but I'm just not seeing progress. My body's not, not budging. And oftentimes stress in someone's life, it's just, the more people I work with, the more I see like how much stress can play such a detrimental role to progress. And if we don't tackle that and don't get to the root cause of things, it's like we're just not going to see the kind of results that we want to see with our bodies and our physiques and our lifestyles. And it's unfortunate because no one wants to tackle that beast. Everyone wants to say, no, I'll just eat more vegetables, or, I'll just eat more protein. Like, that'll fix it. Right. It's like, yeah, it'll improve to an extent the quality of your life and the quality of your results. But it's like, that's always going to be, the stress is going to be the bottleneck. And if we don't manage it, like, that bottleneck is going to hold us back. And it's like, no one wants to talk about that. And no one wants to like really dive into like, why can't they deal with this stress in their life? And it's often like the most undervalued and underdiscussed thing in someone's journey, I feel like.
Yeah. So I actually have a client who just recently, she's had a lot of things going on in her life. She's had a lot of like medical issues, and she had COVID. And so she's trying to just get back into the swing of things. And maybe I shouldn't have said that for the podcast. I feel like sometimes they get flagged. But anyways, but she's just had a lot of things going on in her life right now. And so she had been trying to get back into tracking her macros. And she said in her check-in, she's like, I'm just really overwhelmed with like tracking and trying to just get back on track. And, I don't know if we can do a more like holistic approach. And, I don't know if you do that. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, let's remove tracking. Like, let's see if maybe if you just track protein, if that's something that is still going to stress you out, then we'll remove it altogether. But let's just try that. for now. And let's just, instead of, trying to cram in all 4 of your workouts, let's change one of them to yoga, and like, let's do journaling in the morning, and we implemented all these things. And her next check-in to me was like, I've dropped 4 pounds. And it's just like, it's crazy. Cause it's like, and we had talked about this, we jumped on a phone call, and it's like, when you try to work on your reducing stress and focusing more on like health and your mental health, and of course she's working with me because she has fitness goals and physique goals, but it's like, that was just a outcome from working on all the other things and getting that all aligned. So I just think it's so important. Just removing stressors can make such a huge impact for people.
Absolutely. And I feel like, something you mentioned with her, like feeling overwhelmed with tracking, this is something that comes up a lot because I feel like so many people have such different relationships with tracking their food. There's certain people that love it, that find it easy. There's certain people that hate it, that find it overwhelming. And the trend that I continue to see over and over and over again is the people that find it overwhelming are the ones that don't have the additional headspace to like house that, because it's just another thing that you have to think about. So if you think about someone who is like very, very bad at stress management and they have like a billion things on their plate, they are constantly, on the go, they have like a billion things to think about at all times, their headspace is just going to be limited, and they're going to be more likely to just let that kind of, go off the rails or forget about it because of everything else going on. Whereas if you have someone who's better at stress management, or they just have less going on in their life, those are usually the people that are like, oh yeah, tracking is easy. Like I don't even like have to think about it, but it's just kind of automatic. And like, you can obviously progress on that, get better at it as you practice, but it's like where people start, I often find that to be the indicator of like, how is this person going to handle tracking their food? Should we even use it as a technique? Should we try a different route or method that's going to absorb better to the way that their brain's working right now? And so I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because, and how you adjusted to that, because we, obviously we do very similar things with that, but it's interesting to see like the people that are the most quote unquote stressed out, they're going to have the most issues with then adherence and then sticking to that plan. And they might need, less rigid or demanding ways of reaching their goals.
Yeah. And then it's tough from a coach's standpoint, because of course we think that tracking macros, like obviously all the benefits that comes with that, and learning, more about food and nutrition, and being able to get a better understanding of what you need to eat. But then at the same time, it's like, as a coach, if you were to continue pushing tracking macros and the client continues to feel failure week after week after week, and then they eventually just give up, if you were just to like remove that altogether and they continue making progress. So it's very interesting. And it's, I think it's difficult as, coaching is not just hear your macros.
Yeah.
There's a lot more that goes into it, and really trying to figure out what each person needs. But yeah, it is very interesting how you can give, and that's what we'll talk about today, how you can give someone a task or, a strategy, and how they view it and how they perceive it and how that affects their life is just so different, depending on each individual and all the things that they have going on in their life.
Yeah. And, you made me think of, what you said with kind of just like, okay, do we take out tracking altogether or whatever? I think this kind of goes into how I wanted to frame this conversation in the first place, is like, okay, you have this person that's so stressed out, their mental capacity is like capped on a daily basis. And it's like, we want to introduce tracking macros, getting more awareness of their food, or doing something for their fitness goals. Right. And the biggest thing here is like, in your situation, it was, let's remove tracking from the picture, tracking fully from the picture. And that kind of solved the problem. And you also kind of made some other adjustments with like training, yoga, mindfulness, journaling, and changing those things. But it's like, it doesn't necessarily, in that particular situation that we're talking about, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, just get rid of tracking because you can't handle it. It's just the fact that we have to remove or reduce stress from somewhere. And all stress is cumulative. So it's not just like your fitness stress exists in one bubble and your life stress exists in another bubble, and it's all separate. no, like your headspace is literally cumulative. So you might pile up the first third of your headspace with work stress, and then the next third of your headspace with personal life stress. And then like all the little things might add up, and you might be about to overflow, but you're like, I want to try to add in this fitness stress, right? Because it's like, it's just more things we have to do, think about, manage. And it's all together. So if we were to, with that same person that I just described, if we were to cut personal life stress in half by like implementing some stress management practices or conflict resolution tips or tricks in there, then what, that frees up room for, other things to be introduced. Or what if we, remove work stress? What if that person changes jobs to a better environment? Then that opens up, frees up space for that person to then add in fitness stress on the body, right? And so stress is all cumulative. So it's not necessarily like, oh, if you're having issues with this, just get rid of tracking your food or whatever's stressing out with fitness. It's like, no, let's address any or all of the stresses that you are experiencing. And I think the other thing with this too is making sure we also distinguish between physical and psychological stress, because those again are cumulative. Like if you have mental stress and physical stress, they will all add up on your body, but they are different. So physical is obviously like if you put your body through a heavy leg day, that is physical stress. If you're sick, that is physical stress. If you are having issues with your mental health, that is psychological stress. So all of it adds up, but kind of knowing like, where are these different pieces and parts coming from in different parts of your life, physical versus psychological, and just kind of figuring out like all the different components. So it takes like a decent bit of like reflection on like yourself, your life, to like figure out like, okay, what can I tackle here? And that's again what kind of where the role of a coach comes in, where we kind of look at that as a whole. When we can get a really good idea of where someone is in life, not just in their fitness, then we can say like, okay, I feel like I know what direction we need to go in to help you.
Yeah. And I think it's important, kind of like what you talked about, is like, it's all cumulative, right? Like it's not just this bubble of fitness stress, and then there's this bubble of life stress and work stress and, what all of these things, and they don't operate separately, like they all intertwine. And so I think a lot of times people have this like idea that they all just are in their own separate arenas and they never interact or don't have any I don't know the right word
Like
that I'm looking
overlap.
for. Yeah, they don't have any overlap, or they don't ever like interact with each other. But it's important. It's like, oh, if you're a little bit stressed here, a little bit stressed there, a little bit stressed there, but you have all these different areas that you're a little bit stressed in, then yeah, then you might be really stressed
Right.
overall. So I think it's important, like that you talked about, like, okay, well, what area can I tackle? Like what, if I'm working out 7 days a week and I'm doing, an hour of cardio every single day, like, do you think that you could maybe reduce, a couple days? Do you think you could throw in a rest day here and there? Like, is that something that you think is doable? And so I think it's important. And like you said, really taking a good hard look at where you are in your life and saying what, something's got to give, and where can I start?
Yeah. And I think, especially what you said there is really important. And then, a lot of that really pointed to me as a person. You described that, and it's like, there are people, I am one of them, where I will kind of like look at my life and I'll be like, I'm good. Like, I'm not stressed. I don't feel stressed. Right. So I'm fine. But it's like, how much are you actually balancing on your plate? How much physical and mental like stress? Maybe it's not bad stress. Like stress isn't all bad, but how many things are like weighing on you on a daily basis, right? And so a lot of times it's like I will be in this situation where I feel fine on a day-to-day basis. I'm not like having breakdowns every other day, so I don't think anything is wrong. But then if I were to try and like, for example, diet and like add cardio and try to lose weight, my body might resist if I'm in a period that's like really, really ramped up with like my work life and my personal life. Right. So it's kind of, I like to take this as from a personal example, is like, I'm not in a position to introduce contest prep right now. I would love to contest prep right now, but it's like there's just so many other things that we could be thinking about doing, working on, that if I added that in, I just know my body wouldn't respond. So like I'm waiting for a year, and like my overall big plans align with where I think I'm going to actually have the space and the capacity for that. So I think we've talked about this before. It might have been in the burnout episode. It might have been in a different one with Nick Licamelli, but we talked about like the sink overflowing analogy, right? So you have like the water flow and how much water is coming out of the sink at any given point in time. And then you have the limited capacity of the sink, right? And what you can do is you can either adjust the flow of the water, or you can make the sink bigger, right? And so we have a certain amount of capacity that we have to handle stress. And if we are pouring and pouring and pouring water into that limited capacity sink, eventually we're going to overflow. So we either, slow down the flow of the water, make sure there's less stress overall coming in from all sides, or we find ways to increase capacity, which we'll talk about. But a lot of times increasing capacity comes with like stress management, having the right tactics in place, behaviors, and being able to identify like when is too much and when do we need to scale back on certain things. And I think the final thing that I'll say, I know Christina's like brain is churning right now, is a lot of times we deal with clients that are dealing with thyroid issue, hormonal issues, imbalances, and a lot of these things, and we talked about this in our episode with Lacey Dunn, but a lot of these things, the root cause is chronic high stress levels over a long period of time. And then the body starts to dysregulate from that exhaustion, from all that stress. And so if we can find a solution to the root cause of the stress, whether it's your job or your personal life or something, then over time, your body will kind of get back in line when overall stress has decreased. So it's really just like, it's so interesting and fascinating how this really plays a role in so many people's lives. And even, like I said, people who don't feel stressed, but like their body might be stressed as a result of how much they balance or they carry daily. So all things to think about. Don't sit here and diagnose yourself with a disorder, but just like think about, like reflect on your life, like where are your stressors coming from and how do they actually weigh on you?
Yeah. So you were right. My mind definitely is racing. So with my background in school counseling and just all the schooling that I've done, I definitely have a lot of things that I can say and a lot of techniques and a lot of students that I've mentored and helped counsel. But I think it's important that as you were talking about, the psychological, or I guess just the signs and symptoms of being stressed, I think that's something that we just didn't even think about talking about. So it's kind of like, okay, like, it's kind of like what Marissa said, like, I'm fine. Like, no, I'm not stressed, or like, yeah, well, stress is, I think we think stress is normal, right? Like we think with this whole like grind 24/7 and we can't ask for help and we have to do everything ourselves. And we kind of wear it as a badge of honor, right? Like being able to do everything ourselves and to not, I think, and especially I hate to put like a stereotype on it, but I do feel like women especially are like, I can do everything. Like I can be the best wife and cook all the meals and dinners, and I can clean the house, and I can also have a career, and I can also do, X, Y, Z. And we do everything. And so I think it's, instead of just being like, hey, can I get a little help with this? We'll stay up until 2 a.m. Like we'll do what we need to do to get everything done. But then we are like, oh, actually, like I'm incredibly stressed. So I think if you're sitting here and being like, well, maybe I am stressed, I think it's important to run through what are the symptoms? Like, how do you know if you're stressed? And of course, that stress affects everyone differently, and you might have a different reaction than someone else. But just some general things to look out for is having an inability to concentrate or having issues with memory, and you maybe are super anxious, or you have these like racing thoughts, your heart rate is elevated all the time, maybe to the point of you're having panic attacks. If you're having physical plateaus, like for example, you're not able to lose weight. And so maybe you're actually gaining weight, or again, stress can manifest itself in other ways, and you can actually be losing a lot of weight. Like you have a lack of appetite, hair loss, if you're having headaches, overall, just like a lower mood. You're just not as happy as you used to be. Maybe you're more negative than before. And a lot of times having an upset stomach. So I know that was really, really big for a lot of my students. Like if they have a test coming up and they're really nervous and they're really stressed, and all of a sudden they have to run to the bathroom. And it's hard because I think when you're younger, you don't understand the correlation between things like that and how things show up physically, but also like joint pain, and poor sleep. If you're not able to sleep, if you're restless, all of those things could be some signs that you're stressed. And so, I think it's important, like Marissa said, we're not here to diagnose or say you need to go see someone. But if you're experiencing some of these things, it could just be, oh, maybe I'm actually not sick. I'm actually dealing with a lot of stress in my life, and actually suppressed immune system is one of those things as well. So if you are like, why am I always sick? Like I'm constantly getting sick. Like I eat a good diet. Why is this happening? It might be something that there's something going on in your life that you need to kind of get a hold on.
Yeah, I love that. And really helpful to identify. A couple of things I want to add there. What you were saying about like, oh, stress is normal, like we just put it on ourselves. It's like the busy culture is the word that came to mind for me. Is like everybody's, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. And it's like, yeah, but like, are we being effective here? Like there is so much like that badge of honor on being busy and being tied up with things and crazy with life. But it's like, is that really the way that we want to live? And so I really challenge everybody listening to this to ask themselves, if there's someone who identifies strongly with like, oh, I'm proud of being busy all the time, I'm, it's just how I operate, it's how my life is, really take a hard look at that and be like, do I need to be busy? Or like, are there ways that I can improve my time management and be more efficient and get the same amount of stuff done without like running myself into the ground like this? I also thought of this is something I used to have happen all the time. And it would be like, I always would like joke, it's like dark humor, but I would tell people like, I just pretty much just like my life is just walking the line of burnout. And like, that's just how I operate. Like I used to wear that as a badge of honor 100%. And like, I'm working on getting a lot better at that lately, and taking things off of my plate. But basically, especially when I was a student, plus building and growing the business, plus like contest prep, all the things, right? Anytime I would finish a phase of like pushing hard towards something, so maybe I would have final exam season, I would push hard towards that. I would work really, really hard until I had everything submitted, and then like boom, week after, I'm sick. Because your body, that's how your body responds to stress. It'll get you through the hard stuff. It'll push until you get there, and then once you're there, when it gets the chance to relax, then it's like, oh, there's the suppressed immune system, and like you might get really, really sick right after. So that's something I had happen a lot in my past. And then the last thing I'll say is like poor sleep, can't get to sleep, or maybe you get to sleep just fine because you're exhausted, but you wake up and you're still exhausted. That is a huge sign.
Yeah. And so I think it's important as we run through all of these things and we talk about how bad stress is, like, reduce stress. We can't get rid of all of our stress. Like that would be awesome, right? Like to live this super stress-free life, living on a beach, like no care in the world. But I think it's important to think about like not all stress is bad. Some stress is good. Like, for example, like you mentioned, the night before you have an essay due or you have a big exam coming up, like you start to stress about it. And what that does is hopefully it kicks your butt into gear, and it sits you down, and you're panicking to try to submit your essay, or you're cramming for an exam or something like that. Like having some sort of stress usually initiates some sort of reaction because you're trying to reduce that stress. And of course, there are things that we can do, like maybe instead of having this panic attack that you have an essay due in an hour, maybe you had worked on an outline a week week before, and maybe you had, a little bit of a draft going on. So you've taken some steps to reduce that like panic, but some stress is good, and it usually does cause you to take some sort of action to reduce that stress. So while acute stress is not all that bad, and of course there are different levels of acute and chronic, so something that is short-term versus long-term, but I think it's important, and we'll talk about like reframing and how you can react to stress, but not all of it is bad.
Yeah, great point. And, I think what you made me think of there was, and this will relate heavily with fitness journeys, but, there's always going to be something that comes up. There's always going to be a new stressor, a new thing to deal with, something that's going to stress you out, that's going to cause trouble in your life. There is always going to be something, you just can't predict, and you can't control those things either. And so when it comes to talking about stress management, there's a reason why we use the term management, because it's not about getting rid of it. Like Christina said, we have to either reduce what we can control, or if it's out of our control, how do we like respond to that? And like, what do we do in turn when stressors present themselves? Because they will. And so the first step, I think, when it comes to implementing good stress management is, and we'll get into like the how and the mindset. I want to talk about one more thing first, but like, it really is accepting the fact that like, we have all these uncontrollables, we have these things that are going to pop up. We will never be able to stop that from happening unless we literally lock ourselves in a box for the rest of our life. And in that case, it's like, okay, now we're stressed about claustrophobia, but
yeah, I was just thinking that.
Yeah. But right. So it's like, we can't get rid of any stressors, and we can't control where they come from or what they are, but we can control how we manage it. And so I think one thing that you were talking about, acute versus chronic stress, I want to like dig into just kind of how this works with our body and our physiology really quickly before we get into just tactics to manage stress. So stress affects the body, and the best way that this is described is with Hans Sale, I think I'm saying that right, but his general adaptation syndrome, and you learn about it in all the psychology classes because you learn about cortisol, and you learn about it in all the physiology, the biology classes too. So, anybody who might find this familiar, just bear with me here. So basically, the general adaptation syndrome is 3 phases that your body goes through when it undergoes stress. And it's important to note that like, this isn't good stress or bad stress. Again, it's just stress. Stress is neutral, and it's how it affects us and how we respond to it that makes it positive or negative. So stress is applied to us, our body, our mind, whatever it is, and we react, right? So we have this immediate alarm system. So that's the first phase, is alarm. And we basically, our body ramps up. We're in fight or flight mode. It's our sympathetic nervous system. For those of you who are familiar, it just puts us in the mode of like, we have adrenaline running. Like, our body's like, I'm ready to fight. I'm ready to do whatever I need to do to attack this stressor, right? Problem is, not a lot of stuff is life or death anymore in this day and age in our first world country. So like, we might have this anxious response, right? Panic, or like that alarm that Christina was talking about that like gets us to take action. So like, that's the first thing. And then we have resistance. So resistance is when that stressor is prolonged for a period of time after that alarm. Like, if it's not dealt with right away, our body stays in this resistance mode. So I like to think of this as like, when I was describing how like, I'll push and push and push through a semester, and I would, just get through to the very end where like, okay, I'm getting all my final exams done. I'm tired, I'm fighting, and I'm getting all of this out of the way. And then the final phase of the general adaptation syndrome is exhaustion. So that's the point where like, okay, you've kind of tapped out all your resources here. Your body can't make any more of the hormones and neurotransmitters that are creating this response of like elevated response to this stressor. And so it's exhausted. And that's the point at which, oh, I've burnt myself out, I'm done with the semester. And that's when I get sick, right? And so then our body goes into recoup mode where it has to recover from being in that alarm system phase for so long. So acute stress is like, you basically throw a stressor at you, you're in either the alarm or the resistance phase for a short period of time. You deal with the stressor, you adapt, you move on. So this is called general adaptation syndrome because we adapt to stress. Stress helps us grow and increases our tolerance to stress. So I talked about the sink, the analogy to that, our capacity for stress, it can grow. But the important part is it won't grow if we burn ourselves out and, try to deal with the same stressors for too long. So that's where acute stress is great. It helps us adapt. I like to compare this to progressive overload in the gym because we're kind of giving ourselves like a little bit more with weight, with reps, so that we adapt and we get better. But what would happen to the person who is setting foot in the gym for the first time in their life at age, like, let's say 30, and we throw an IFBB Pro bodybuilder's chest day at them on day one? That's going to just completely blow their system. They are not going to be able to recover. They're going to immediately, go to exhaustion, right? It's too much stress. So that's kind of how that looks, is if we have too much chronic stress for too long, it's like throwing that newbie into that advanced person's workout. But if we kind of gradually step up one step at a time with our stress tolerance and like what amount of stress we're exposed to, we can learn to handle more and more and more. Same thing with progressive overload, but it's just really like it can help us grow, but too much will be bad. So that's kind of the point I wanted to get across there.
I love everything that you just said. And it makes me think again, going back to, I feel like kind of the culture or just kind of like how people feel about stress right now. It's like you said, like we can't cut it all out, right? Like not all of it is bad. And so I think that people have this idea that anything that causes them any amount of stress at all, they need to completely cut out of their lives.
It must go.
Yeah, it's toxic and I have to cut it out. So I think you make a really good point that if we avoid stress and we avoid that for the rest of our life, you said it perfectly, we're never going to be able to increase our tolerance of it. And so I was thinking like, you get that stressor, like you get a work email, right? And it's like, we need to talk, or, like you have like an angry customer, an angry whatever. And it's like, you get that like initial, like, oh my gosh, like you go through the panic mode, and let's say you just delete the email or you never deal with that situation because you're like, this is just too toxic. Like this is just too whatever. Then the next time that happens, you don't have any sort of frame of reference for how to deal with that in the future. And so it's just going to continue to cause that same alarm and that same symptoms throughout your body. But if you were to have taken that email, or you had had that tough conversation with someone, maybe it doesn't go that well, but the next time you're faced with a similar situation, you're more ready to handle that. And you're saying, well, that didn't work, so let me try something different. So I really, really like that. Instead of trying to avoid everything, there are some things that we should try to tackle because it's just going to make us stronger in the future. And when we are faced with that stressor, it may not actually feel the exact same way. It's kind of like, oh, I've been here before, I can do it again. No big deal. Like, what else you got?
Yeah. Oh, fitness parallel. I got one. So, so basically you just made me think of, we were talking at the beginning of this episode about like, oh, too much stress on this person, let's eliminate tracking or whatever. And a lot of times we, as coaches, a lot of the barriers with people staying on track happens on the weekends. And it's like, they're eating out, they're out of routine. And a lot of the barriers to like logging their food is like, well, I just don't know what's in it, or I don't know how. And so I just don't. That is exactly what we're talking about here, is like, okay, so basically what you're doing is pushing it under the rug. So we don't have any frame of reference of how to tackle this in the future, right? So what if we knuckle through it the first time, it goes terribly, you still are off track, and like, but at least you plugged it in, right? Then, okay, we have data, we have knowledge, we have tools that we can now take to improve upon the next time that you go out to eat. Okay, what did you learn from that? Maybe I should ask for no oil. Maybe I should ask for dressing on the side. I could bring that fat content down. Maybe I shouldn't eat the fries and the bun because that put me over on my carbs. Maybe I should have, half of one of them. So we learn things and it helps us to grow and then tackle that situation again. And that's how clients get from a place of they're always off track on the weekends. They're always going through, Monday through Friday is great, Saturday, Sunday sucks. They're going through that cycle to they can actually have balance every single day of the week. So that's how you grow. You increase your capacity for that kind of stress.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, we could spend so much time talking about the psychology of tracking macros. And it's kind of like, yeah, every client's different. And there might be some clients where instead of saying, yeah, well, let's pull back and let's not track at all, there might be some clients where it's like, well, hey, what is the barrier to tracking? Like, what do we need to do that makes it easier for you? And so it's not a big stressor. Like if you're spending 30 minutes every night trying to figure out your macro puzzle and you don't know what to eat, well, maybe we just create like a little bit of a meal plan and you do that for a little bit, on the days that you're running around and you don't have that capacity. So like every situation, every person is so different. And I think, again, it's like you said, like it might be stressful at first, but it does get easier over time, the more situations that you're in. And I mean, yeah, we could do we have a whole macros 101. And I mean, we could probably even do like a macro tracking episode. There's so much to do, but I really, really love that. But it's like, every time you go through it, even if you fail, like you're going to learn something, you're going to have another tool that you can utilize if you're in a similar situation in the future. So just love this. Such a good conversation.
I love this. Yes. Okay. So let's get into tactics to manage stress. So I guess the first one, and we can kind of just bounce back and forth and keep building off of each other here. So the first one is really, it's going to be your mentality. It's going to be your mindset across the board. Like that is going to be your best friend in this journey, in any journey really. And it's also going to be your worst enemy if you allow it to be. So there's kind of two things that we wanted to touch on here with your mindset, being able to take things and reframe them and think about them differently. And a lot of this comes down to like, unfortunately, like worldview, like literally like the way that you see how your life is like your overall mentality that's probably affecting like how do you perceive and handle stress and like how do you tackle these things moving forward. So the biggest one that we see and we've mentioned in the past is the victim mentality versus more of a proactive or like self-efficacy mentality, where it's like a victim mentality is you think that things happen to you. You think that things are unfair and you have less control over what goes on in your life. And so if you ever catch yourself saying things like, why does this happen to me? Or like, why me? Or like, I wish like this could happen or whatever. Wish this could happen to me. I wish I could be like that. You're often, and it's a spectrum, right? It's not just you are one or you are the other, but like we all operate on a scale of like, for some things you might have a victim mentality and for other things you might have a super proactive mentality, right? So it's not black and white here, but then the proactive or, high self-efficacy and mentality where like you control your outcomes for the most part. Like, what you have control over in your life, that things don't just happen to you, but you kind of manifest and create opportunities in your life. And, you have a higher sense of self and control in that. And, it's less of blaming others and more of taking personal responsibility in your life. And so obviously one is going to help you more than the other. And we often kind of fall into these mindsets without realizing it. That's the sad part. It's like, because obviously if everyone was like, I don't want a victim mentality, I want to be proactive, then we'd all do it if it was easy, right? But we kind of fall into it like subconsciously through the things that happen to us across our entire lives.
Yeah. And I think it's important to like, we're bringing up the topic of like being optimistic or like pessimistic. And so I think, if you're sitting here thinking like, oh, well, shit, when I get a stressor, I'm like, woe is me. Like, what am I going to do? And I think it's like, that's a very natural reaction to a stressor. But I think it's like you were saying, it's like, well, how do I have these feelings, but now what? Like, now that I've kind of sat with them for a little bit, I kind of have a better idea of how I'm feeling. Well, now what? Now what do I do? Do I continue to have that victim mentality and just that's how I go about my life or how I'm going to deal with the situation, or am I going to be like, okay, that sucks, but now I need to do something about it? So when we talk about reframing, again, every person will react to certain situations different. So like, let's say, for example, here, you go into your job and your boss comes and says you're fired. And so, you have one person who's like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? This is the worst day of my entire life. Like, I spilled coffee this morning. I was late to work. And like, now I got fired. And, I don't know what I'm going to do. What was me? What am I going to do for money? Like, all of that. And they just sit there and they bask in that feeling of suckiness. And you have someone else who, like, the boss is like, you're fired. And they're like, hell yeah. Like, they're like, good. I hate this job. It was sucking the life out of me. I wasn't a happy person. Now, like, I didn't have to make the decision myself, but now there are so many possibilities because I can get a new job. I can't wait to update my resume and start interviewing. Like, it's the exact same situation, but you have two people who just have a completely different mentality towards it. And again, maybe that person isn't like good, like they tell that to their boss's face. Maybe they sit there and they're like, shit, what am I going to do? But then later they're like, wow, actually, no, this opens up a lot of different like opportunities for me that I couldn't see, but now I do. So it's really about reframing. And so if you were familiar with Jocko Willink, then you would get that good reference. But he always talks about how, in his career, people would be like, hey, Jocko, like, this came up and da 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 da, and they're like freaking out. And he's just like, good. Like, he's just like, so like, because he understands that we grow with adversity. We grow with these things that are thrown at us, kind of like we were talking about before, that we now build these tools to be able to handle things in the situation. So adversity is not all bad. It is an opportunity for us to prove to ourselves that we can do hard things, that we can overcome, and just kind of seeing the good in everything in all the situations. So I highly recommend taking a listen, or just like, reading his books, or just, again, his mentality towards things is just so different. But it's like all these bad things, he just is like, good, like, that's great. Like, now let's tackle it. Now let's deal with it. So I think reframing is probably one of the biggest tactics that I love to use with people. It's like, well, how can we just view this just a little bit differently?
Yeah. Yeah. And definitely, I think, what you brought to mind here is, well, first of all, it's like sad that, you said Jocko's mindset is so different. It's like, it's so different because the victim mentality is normal and that is conventional. And that's what people celebrate is, wallowing in our pain and, just being able to feed off of like who is the most miserable. I feel like is sometimes the culture, especially in like the corporate workplace, it's like, who is the most miserable, like who gets that award, like who, like who's dealing with the most, right? And it's almost, again, a badge of honor that a lot of people wear. So I think you made me think of that, which made me sad, but then you also made me think of like, I think the best word to describe the opposite of the victim mentality, we've used self-efficacy, we've used proactivity. I think it's really just the growth mindset, and really just like being able to look at a situation and say, like, how is this going to help me move forward? And like kind of a more, I guess, more realistic situation than someone getting fired and being like, yeah, it's like, it's probably like, oh, like you said, that sucks, but like, how can I try to see what opportunities this might open up for me? And it's hard, right? We're always going to have the tendency to want to blame other people, to not put it on ourselves, to not take personal responsibility. But like, something I was thinking about as you were describing the scenario is like, I put myself into the shoes of both of these people, and I was like, for either of them, it's just like, especially the one with the victim mentality, and they're sitting there going, why do these things happen to me? I'm just sitting here thinking like, well, like, what was this person not doing that led them to get fired? Like,
right. Yeah.
And so it's like the person who would have like taken that growth mindset approach, I don't think they would have been fired in the first place, because they just probably wouldn't be that kind of person. So labeling aside, I think one thing that is really important to touch on here, that they kind of bleed into each other, are two different things. So we're talking about these mentalities, victim versus growth mindset, and how these affect how we respond or react to things that come to us. And so one thing I really love to talk about all the time is how we respond versus react to things, because your reaction is feelings, is adrenaline, is emotion. It's like reaction is your instinctual, like whatever is innate in you, that's how we react, right? But we can choose to respond. And oftentimes the people with a victim mentality don't even realize that we have that choice, that we have that power to choose a response, but we do. So that is one shift and mindset shift that we need to make from victim to growth mindset of like, first and foremost, anytime we're faced with a stressor, we don't have to just react. We don't have to react with our emotions and then just let it be there. We have the choice to respond differently. And so that's something that I really like to emphasize with clients, because we can't control the way that we react. That is going to be instinctual. It is going to happen automatically. Over time, we might be able to change our reactions from practice and having more of a growth mindset. But still, like if something sucks, it's going to suck, right? Like we are going to sit there and cry or feel our feelings. And, I think the first part of this, when it comes to responding and reacting, I love to just remind people, like, let yourself feel, let yourself like sit in that emotion for a minute, because emotions are temporary, feelings are temporary, they will come and go. And we have to at least let ourselves feel the reaction, right? Because it's going to sting, it's going to hurt, whatever it is, it's going to be stressful. But then it's, what do we do with that? And what deadline do we set with ourselves, right? Like if we have like a really, really, really tragic life event happen, that deadline might be a little bit longer than normal, but I'm still going to give myself a deadline of like, maybe I will give myself to the end of this week to like really sit with this, process my emotions, feel them, because we can't just shove it under the rug. But at the same time, we have to pick a time to start responding differently and taking back control of our life. So I think, your overall mentality, whether it's victim or growth mindset, really frames how you handle responding versus reacting to situations. And really, like when it comes to doing that, I encourage you to allow yourself to feel first, and then start to choose and game plan and create a response that you actually want to respond with. And I think a lot of times it's like the conflict resolution is something that I think about a lot with this, is like if someone comes to you and is like arguing with you or something like that, you might want to react and like call them names and yell at them back and like do all these things. But then like, how do you like compose yourself and respond in a good way? That can be the game changer of like that entire dynamic and that entire relationship.
Yeah. So the first thing that, what I was thinking about when you were talking about responding versus reacting, like, I think the first thing that my mind went to was being in a relationship, right? And like you have some sort of difficult conversation, or, your spouse, significant other makes you mad, says something. And, I think that a lot of, normally in the beginning of a relationship, you react, right? Like you might scream at them, you might say some things that you didn't mean to say. And I feel like that's always, like, I'm sorry for what I said when we were having that conversation, because I was upset and I was just reacting. Those were my feelings. So, responding and really trying to think about like, okay, like I'm feeling these feelings because of XYZ. And I think for me personally, sometimes I'm like, hey, like I need 5 or 10 minutes. I need to sit and think and process everything that you're telling me. And I need to come back at a later time before I say something that I don't mean, or say it in a way that I, or just kind of like, is this a proper reaction? Or like, so that's normally I'll call my mom and I'm like, this is a situation, this is how I'm feeling. Like, is this valid, or am I being crazy, or am I overreacting, or, am I not seeing things from their perspective? And so I think it's really good, again, like you said, to process and then respond. So responding before we react, because again, when we react, we're not doing things very logically, we're doing it with just kind of our emotion. And so there are times where I'm like, okay, yeah, actually I'm in the wrong. But if I had sat in that moment and tried to fight it out, like it wouldn't have been the most productive thing to do.
It would have been Christina is right at all costs, and you must kneel to this.
Yes. My poor husband. No, but I think it's important, because I think the other thing too is, again, and we're taking this into a different direction, but oftentimes when it comes to relationships, right? If you have something that you're being called out on, I think our initial reaction is to be defensive.
Oh yeah.
And it's, well, I didn't mean to do this, or like, that's not how I meant to come across. And we get very defensive, and then we start to go, well, you do this. And rather than just being like, you know what, you're right. Like I have been, doing X, Y, and Z, or I haven't been doing this as much. And you're right. I need to fix this. And this is what I'm going to do. So I think it's in, like, that's just initially where my mind went, was responding versus reacting. But I think it's something that we all can really relate to when it comes. And maybe it's not just a spousal relationship. It could be just a relationship with a best friend. Like we've all been there.
Totally. And so one more thing on that, and then we'll move on, because like it's really relevant. I think it's a big part of this stress management stuff, because a lot of stress comes from arguments and interpersonal relations. Mm-hmm. So it's funny you mentioned that with just kind of like needing 5 to 10 minutes to like process and all of that between like an argument. And so it's funny because my and your now two mentors are a married couple, and they actually did a podcast on this where they talked about like how they solve conflicts within their relationship. And it's like, you kind of have to know yourself. And it's like, are you the type of person who can like be in an argument and like sit there and like rationally think through things? 99% of people probably aren't. They're probably going to get caught up in the heat of the moment and the emotion. There's a select few here and there who can like really kind of like only see things logically, so their brain never jumps to that emotional side. But in general, it's like, you got to know yourself. You got to know like, okay, if I'm going to like, say something I regret or just not respond appropriately, then it's like, let's take some space and let's do what we need to do to process this. So you said you called your mom. I process everything through writing. So like when I'm on calls with people, I always write notes, and like whether it makes sense or not, it like makes me just process it better. I've always been a note taker in school, and it's always just like helped me to really digest information. So I will journal whatever my immediate, like in the moment feelings are. I try to do it as quickly as I can whenever there's a conflict, because then I can get that like raw emotion out, and then I can kind of decipher like what's going on here. And I think what you said exactly about like being defensiveness is like holding up, it's like holding up the white flag. It's like, I am guilty, but I'm just being defensive because I don't know what else to do right now. And it's like, defensiveness is almost always like a response when like, that you're being called out on something you should be responsible for. And it's kind of like excuses for, whatnot. So a lot of times we can get rid of that defensiveness by just like pausing, letting ourselves like get out of the emotional state, and then logically process. And it's really, really, really hard, because so many of us just live our lives operating in emotion. What feels good in the moment? What is going to give me joy right now? What's going to, get me away from this anger or the sadness right now? But, if we can try to live our lives in a way where we're really trying to take logical steps with our life, our conflicts, our stress, we're going to get a lot farther.
To further this tangent,
yes, more.
I will say, there are times where I'm like, hey, I need a couple minutes to like process, but at the same time, I'm the absolute worst. Like if there's an argument or there's something happening at the end of the night, and my husband will be like, well, let's just sleep on it. And I'm like, no. I'm sorry, what? Because he and I could be arguing, and he's like, well, it's late, let's go to bed. And he'll like, as soon as his head hits the pillow, like, boom, he's asleep. And
like not thinking about it at all.
No, and then I'm sitting there like laying next to him, and I'm like, how the hell is he sleeping right now? So there are times where I do think like, yeah, of course you do need time to like process, but at the same time, like, I'm also like, hey, I need to solve this problem. Like I
now.
I don't want to just let this just sit and, deal with this the next couple of days. Like I need to process this now. So I think that's, again, we could go into this whole relationship thing, but knowing yourself and also knowing your partner. So I think, again, with our mentors, they talk about how one person walks away, and it's not because they don't want to deal with the issue. It's just because they need to process, and the other one goes and follows and it's like, hey, let's solve it. Let's solve it. Let's solve it. And it's like, you're smothering me. Like,
Yeah.
so
You
I think
listened to the same podcast that I did.
yeah, I'm sure. But yeah, so I do think it is really interesting too. It's like, knowing how you like to work around issues, but then the person that you're having that, issue with, you need to think about how they process and what they need to do to make sure that they come at it at a good, non-emotional, more logical state. So tangent aside, or maybe we're not done.
I have one more thing.
Okay.
This is helpful. This is actionable. Okay. So
Yes.
basically, this is a tip that I've been using, and we've been using it within our team for work now, because we have a team of 5. So we actually have to communicate like across the board. And so this is a really important tip and feedback mechanism that you can use to communicate with other people. That's going to help you remove yourself from emotion and give logical feedback, and then provide someone else with the opportunity to solve that problem. So it's called PFFF. It stands for permission, facts, feedback, future. And so we've been using this and just practicing it with like stupid things like, hey, can I give you some feedback? Like, something really stupid. I don't know. I can't think of an example, but basically you start with permission. So can I give you some feedback? The person can either say yes, or later. The contingency is later has to be within 24 hours. So it cannot be pushed off for too long. And so you are then getting permission because, so it might not be the best time for someone to receive feedback at any given time. So if you think about it, when you come up to your spouse, your significant other, your boss, maybe they're super tied up with something and stressed, and you just say like, you never do this and blah, 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 right? So it's like, that is the worst time, and they're obviously going to respond poorly. So then we go facts. So facts are logical things that you can physically prove, like a text message or an email or something someone verbatim said. You cannot imply anything. You cannot say how it made you feel. Just a fact. The facts are this. The facts are, you said that you were struggling with getting this file organized. And then you give the feedback. And the feedback is, again, trying to be as unemotional as possible, but, it makes me feel like you are, struggling with organization in multiple parts of your job, and it is concerning about, your overall efficiency. And then future is, what can we do, or how can I help with solving this problem? And so you are not providing a solution. You're not imposing anything on anyone, and you allow them to come up with the solution. Then you can collaborate, and it really puts people into a frame of mind where like you can actually solve a problem together logically, instead of being so caught up in the emotions, instead of getting defensive and all of those things. So we've been implementing that on our team, and it has been so helpful, because like there's just no absolutes. There's no, you never do this, you always do this, you're always late, blah, blah, blah. Like you can't say that, because that's an absolute. That's not a fact, right? So the facts are, you were late to the last 4 meetings. Okay, what do we do with that, right? So that's a tip that you can use for stress management, for communication, for feedback. So it is applicable, but obviously we have definitely gone off on a little bit.
Yeah. And I there's so much I could add, but I feel like maybe we'll have a whole different podcast on
like communication.
Yeah, communication, because it is really important. And I think, it's something that you're, again, going back to this whole thing, like we're not born with these like super amazing communication tactics. Like we have had those, moments where we reacted and it's like, well, that didn't go well.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, what can we do to make this a little bit better? And I think when it comes to a spouse, or it comes to a work relationship, like it's something that you kind of over time will develop and just be like, this, like you said, it's like, hey, we need to come at it so we're working in a frame point where we're both not in this heightened state, that we're both in a position that we can sit down and tackle and try to figure things out. So yeah, communication is huge, and not that we are experts in any means, but we have gotten better over time.
Yeah.
So
and it'll reduce stress in your life.
Yes,
to communicate better.
That's our main, 15-minute, 10-minute tangent. So to move onto the next tactic to manage stress, this is something that I used to do with my students is I'd have this circle and I'd have them draw it, and it's like this little circle, and then I'd have them draw a bigger circle around that circle. And I'm like, all right, so this inside the circle, it's like, well, what is inside of our control? Like what can you physically, like what can you do? What can you control? Well, I can control my actions. I can control how I respond. I can control, this. And then it's like, all right, well, what's out of our control? Well, I can't control my parents. I can't control how other people react to me. I can't control what's going to happen in the future. And so it's like, okay, yeah. So does it make sense to worry about the things that we can't control? And it's like, well, no, not really. Okay. So can we worry about the things that are in our control? Well, yeah, I could probably worry about those a little bit more. And so I do that for mostly for students who are feeling very anxious about things. And I think the future has a lot of things, and also the past. Like you worry about things that happened in the past, but it's out of our control. There's nothing that we can do about it. So let's focus on what we can do. So it's kind of like, like when you're in a conflict of some sort with someone else, going back to the exact same example that we were just giving, it's like you can control your emotions, you can control what you say, but you can't control what your partner or whoever you're talking to is going to react. So instead of worrying about it, or well, what if they say this? What if they say that? What if this happens? It's like, well, just focus on you, just focus on what you're going to do, and what you can do to solve the problem. So I really like that exercise, because I think at the same time, it really kind of, it puts things in perspective, and it's like, wow, there's actually really not a whole lot that I can do other than how I react to the situation and what I do from this point on.
Yeah, I love that exercise. And I'll probably have some people do that. But I think the other takeaway I got from that is like it really brings your focus to the present, because most of the time, what's in your control is right now. And we spend so much time worrying about what about in a year? What about, we do this with fitness so much. We say, how am I ever going to get to my dream body or my, this strength goal or whatever? And it's like, well, what about all of the other stepping stones that are literally right in front of you, but you're thinking about trying to take like a lifelong leap into the future? Obviously, you're not going to be able to jump that far. Like just take one step. Right. And so I think it really brings into perspective, like, okay, all these things out of our control, those are usually in the past and the future, but what's right now that you can control? It's how you eat today. It's what you choose to put into your body, not only with food and nutrition, but also like, what do you consume on social media? What sort of like things do you listen to? Like, do you listen to an uplifting podcast like this one, or do you like feed into your own negative thoughts? Right. And what can you do right now that is going to help you move forward in the future instead of worrying? Action is always going to do so much more for you and your life and your stress levels than worry will.
Yeah. And I love that. And I have a lot of clients who, God, they nail everything daily. And they're just like, what can I do? What more can I do? What else? And they're thinking the future. And I have to tell them, like, you're doing it all. Like,
this is it.
Yeah, this is like, you've reached such a good point in your fitness journey where you are doing all the basics and it comes naturally to you, that like you've arrived. And as difficult as it is to be as a coach and be like, maybe you can do this, but at the end of the day, it's like, if you just keep doing what you're doing day in and day out, like you're going to make progress. Like this is where the magic happens. And so I like what you said. It's like, well, instead of worrying about like, well, am I doing this? Is this optimal? Is this, if you're doing what you need to do day in and day out, like you're going to make progress.
Yeah. I love that. I think kind of want to speed through the rest of these because it's just, it's going to be a long episode. We appreciate everybody who's still here and who's listening and absorbing all these things, but the next couple of tips don't need a ton of detail. So journaling, breath work, mindfulness, meditation, a lot of this is going to like overlap with the stuff that we've been talking about, like especially when it comes to, I already talked about how I apply journaling, but with breath work, it's like when you're in the moment and your body's in that sympathetic state and it's heightened and you're in an emotional alarm phase, breath work can really help to kind of bring you down and out of emotion and into logic. So like taking deep belly breaths. We talked about this in detail on the pelvic floor podcast of how to be doing this kind of breath work, but it calms your body down from the inside out. Like it really does bring you back into a parasympathetic, relaxed state. So like I always tell people that like, bless you.
I was trying to find the mute button on my microphone. And I was like, I'm not going to find it in time.
No, you're good. But yeah, so like if you are in that state, taking like, I'll tell people who have really stressful desk jobs, like, hey, I know that you're probably not going to have time to like get up and go for a walk right now, but like, can you just take 3 big belly breaths from your desk for me? Like just 3. I know you have time for that. So that's something easy you can do. And then mindfulness kind of plays into everything that we've talked about. Like, can you pause and realize like, I'm in an emotional state right now? Like, where can I like, respond to this? Can I pull myself out of it? And mindfulness just throughout the day can be really helpful for everything, for fitness. I've been implementing it with a lot of clients, but just in overall, like, are you mindful of these stressors? Are you mindful of how you manage them, how you respond, react to them, all those things? Then meditation is kind of like a elongated version of breath work that if you have the time for that 5-10 minutes in the morning, has been shown to be really, really valuable and helpful for a lot of people who struggle with mental health, anxiety, worry, and kind of staying in the present moment. That's really what meditation is meant to bring you back to, is the now and being mindful of the now instead of like letting your brain go everywhere.
Yeah. So just to take those and extend on them a little bit. So when it comes to journaling, so Marissa talked earlier about how if there's something that comes up, she'll journal about that very specific thing. So I think if you have, something that's going on, then yeah, it's easy to journal. So the other thing that you can do is journal prompts. So there are a bunch of things that you can like jump online, find some good things to just kind of journal that day. Or you can do some gratitude work. So,
Ooh, yeah.
I know a lot of people will take their first thing in the morning. They're like, well, what are some of the good things? What are things that I'm grateful for? And so again, it's kind of trying to search for the positive instead of focusing on all the negatives. So something like that can really help frame your day and just put you in a very different state. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand with like that mindfulness is like, what are you doing to set yourself up to be in a better position throughout the day? And when it comes to breath work, this is something that I did a lot with my students. And so one of the things that I like to do is 3s. So breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. So 3 seconds in, 3 seconds out, and doing like, just like you said, like really filling your belly and then emptying your belly of all that breath. And so focusing on your breath kind of does help calm down your mind. So that's something that I really, really love. And literally, if you're sitting here and you do that 3 times in a row, like I can guarantee like your heart rate's going to go down, like you're going to feel better. And it's really hard when we're working, we're grinding, we're doing all this stuff, and to like kind of pause and take a second, like, hey, I need to like relax my shoulders. I need to like take my tongue off the roof of my mouth and like do all these things to like physically like just kind of relax a little bit more. So
I'm doing it right now.
Yeah. So I really love breath work. And one of my favorite things is like, I have kids who just, come into my office crying and they're hyperventilating. And the first thing I do is like, hey, let's just breathe. Like, I don't even know, like, it doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter like what got you, like, let's just breathe. Let's focus. Like, let's bring down your emotional state a little bit. So that was one of my favorite things to do. All my kids afterwards be like, Miss, like, you're very like therapeutic, like such a like calming voice. And I'm like, well, thank you. And maybe not here on the podcast, but when I'm in like counselor mode, that's one of my favorite things to do is like, okay, let's breathe like in through the nose, out through the mouth, like 3 seconds. But yeah, it was one of my favorite things to do. So it seems kind of like, okay, yeah, like journal, like mindfulness, breath work, like all the, it's like,
all the cliche stuff.
Yeah. But it's like, doing all of these things can really, really make a huge difference, especially if you're one that experiences a lot of stress or has a lot going on.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, it's all cliche, but like do you actually do it? Have you even tried to see if it helps?
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
the people that are like, oh, that stuff is so like woo woo, whatever, energy, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, but like you're stressed and like, have you even tried? And like, I used to be that person where I'm like, I feel like I'm above this. I don't need this. And like my ego
Yeah.
got in the way, but like it really does help. The gratitude is something that I
Well,
love.
I think that we see people, these gurus on social media, and they have these like 3 hour long morning routines. And it's like, yeah, well, I'd love to get up and do yoga and do breath work and do journaling and have my coffee out on my patio overlooking the beach. And I'd love to do that for 3 hours, but I can't because I have to be at work at 7 a.m. So
Yeah.
I get that. and so I think it's like that rah rah, like, yeah, all these things look good, but maybe you're not doing all of them, but maybe just pick a few things here and there and implement and see if they help.
Yeah. Cool. So next thing is really just finding outlets for stress. So obviously the gym is going to be a huge one and we are big proponents of that. But also like we've talked about like meditation, yoga is a great one. Creativity in any form. So like art or anything like that. Personally, I actually got myself a piano on Black Friday or Cyber Monday. It's like a little keyboard. But I used to play a little bit. I played a bunch of instruments. I like dabble on the guitar. I played the piano a little bit growing up, did orchestra in elementary school, of course. So but piano was something where it's like, first of all, it's so cool to like sit down at a piano and like be able to play something. Like I just love the idea of that. But at the same time, it's like I wanted to have an outlet that was like stimulating to the mind, like helpful. Like it's so good for your brain to learn music. But at the same time, like it can be another outlet for stress because like the gym is absolutely one for me, but it's like I kind of want to have different avenues. So it's like making sure that I build in the time to do certain things like that was really important to me. So that's been fun. Been teaching myself a couple of songs, but like creativity in general is like so good for stress management and relief.
Yeah. And like yoga is another one. Adult coloring books. I know that those are really popular.
Huh.
I'm same way as you. Like when I am looking for an outlet, I still like to be productive because
Yeah.
that's my personality. So I'm a huge nerd. I love crossword puzzles. And it's something that I can like tangibly complete. So it makes me feel like successful to complete
Yeah.
it. But I also know it's something that, like you said, it's like stimulating the mind. It makes me think. So I love crosswords. Like I will like, and I think so my husband and I will have these conversations. And I think you and I have had them too. It's like, I don't like sitting down and like watching shows or watching movies because I feel unproductive during that time. So if I'm able to just do something like a crossword, like I'm able to feel like I can kind of do both things, but I'm still being productive. But it's also like that personally is an outlet of stress. Whereas like sitting down and watching a movie, for some people might be like, oh, wow, this is so like stress relieving. I'm like, this actually stresses me out. So I'll do something like that. So I know, I just think it's super interesting how like our minds work and how different things will cause stress and then other things will de-stress. But yeah, I think it's super important to just figure out something that works for you, that is just like an escape, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the same thing with like reading. Like I can't really read nonfiction if I'm stressed out because it's like that just gets my head going and I'm like, oh my God, business ideas, blah, blah, blah. And so I will read like fictional like novels when I want to like escape. So reading is another one too. But
Yeah.
next one would just be to actually ask for help. So, like Christina was saying at the beginning, especially as women, but like in general, people nowadays tend to just like try to take on the world and not give up anything up or, not trust anyone with like taking care of things for them. And ultimately, we have a limited capacity physically, mentally, emotionally. So, like at a certain point, everyone has their breaking point to burn out. And I would advise not hitting that point would be great for most people. I've had to learn this through trial and error. And I'm finally getting better at it, delegating a lot more. Obviously, I have a team now, so I'm doing a lot less of, the nitty gritty types of things. So with work, especially, that's been a lot better. But like just asking for help, like in life, is such a good skill, and so many people struggle to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, Marissa and I have 100% been in that position before and used to wear it as a badge of honor. But now, like, and I used to think too, something as silly as like cleaning the house. And, now that we have a house and it's not just, we're in a smaller apartment where it's doable, there's a lot of things that we need to do. And I always used to be like, I can't believe people would hire someone to clean their house when they can just do it themselves and save money. And now I'm like, that's something I don't want to do. I don't really enjoy it that much. I'd rather be doing other things. And like, I have a very different perspective on it now. It's like, I am going to like hire someone to do that. Cause like, I just have gotten over the point where I don't want to have this like badge of honor of like, oh, I'm the one that cleans my house. I do all the grocery shopping. We do grocery delivery now. Like,
Yeah.
because I don't like, I used to enjoy it and I still do sometimes, like going in and seeing new products and all this stuff. But I'm like, I just don't have, 2 hours to spare to go and stand in line and, come home and drive. Like, I'm just like, deliver it to my house. I don't care. It's an additional like $12 a month or whatever. I got to tip the driver, but like, that's just something I'm going to do now. So my perspective and like things have changed a lot, but I am more likely to delegate or like ask for help and just like, hey, I can't do this. Can you do this? Like, is that something that you can take on? So I'm much more likely to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love it. And like I'm doing the same thing. I'm freaking looking at house cleaners. I'm like
Meal
just trying
prep.
to, yeah, we have a meal prep service that we use now because like I just don't ever want to cook anymore. And like it's just, yeah, it's priority shift and it's like know what you can get rid of off your plate and like know that like it's either time or it's money and like it's worth it for spending money on that kind of stuff to save time. Sometimes you got to buy back your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing is, not being alone in your thoughts. And so I talked about this, like if I have something going on, I immediately call my mom or I'm like, hey, Marissa, like this is a situation, like, this is how I feel, but like, what are your thoughts? And so and of course it varies depending on the situation, but a lot of times I will try to figure out like, hey, am I in the right? Did I handle this situation the right way? How would you go about it? And that really, really helps me with how I'm perceiving certain situations. And then of course, like what strategies I can take to implement to reduce the stress or to make the situation better. So I really think it's important, especially if you're struggling, to let someone know and to say, hey, this is kind of where I'm at right now, like just kind of giving you an idea. So you have people that are more likely to help you out or just kind of check in on you. But I think it's just so important to let other people in on what's going on.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And just kind of having a sounding board, no matter what it is, if it's your fitness journey that you're stressed about, then like hiring a coach, obviously. If it's your personal life, having someone you can go to. And then, the other thing with stress management is like if this is something that you really, really struggle with, and you don't have that sounding board, you don't have a safe space, like this is where, having a counselor or having a therapist is like a really, really great option for a lot of people. And thankfully, it's becoming something that's less taboo now and people talk about and are more open to, but there's still cultures that don't accept mental health, kind of help with mental health. Specifically Asian cultures would like they don't acknowledge it. And so they're a lot more stubborn around it. And so like that's a barrier for a lot of people. But yeah, just like knowing that that is also an option when things might be really bad, and things don't have to be really bad for you to go to someone to talk about it. Sometimes you just want like a safe space and to be able to like have that neutral sounding board. And I feel like a lot of times our clients are like, I feel like you're my therapist, haha. But it's like, it's because we're a neutral
We are.
sounding board, right? So like
Yeah.
we're able to like house those thoughts and things. So I think that's probably a good way to finish is like stress management, like take everything as much as you can into your own hands to like delegate, manage, reduce, work on what you can and shift your mindset. But like at a certain point, if you are in a position where it is overtaking your life, your thoughts, and your mental health, like go to professional help. And like this podcast, as much as we love to have the honor of saying we are not professional help in that regard. Well, I'm not.
Sort of.
Christina is
no.
credentialed
Yes.
too. So, but like, someone that like you can talk with one-on-one.
Yeah. So basically, we hope that you got a lot out of this episode, and you have a better idea of like what stress looks like, how it can kind of manifest within your life, and hopefully have a better idea of like knowing that stress and different factors, different areas of your life all interact, and knowing when something has to give, and you have some strategies that you can implement that will help reduce that stress. So of course, just to also remind you guys, if you are listening this far, we appreciate you so much. And, we do have that giveaway going on. So at the end of this episode, go right now and go leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or Spotify. But we hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. It was a really, really fun one for both of us. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christy Lynn Fit and Marissa at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.